The yard. As soon as we pulled into the driveway, I hooked the doglets onto their leashes and took them inside. I didn't wait for my parents. I didn't say anything. I just went. Everything was as I left it Wednesday night. Somehow that surprised me. I don't know what I thought I would find. The girls were happy to be home, but they too appeared to pause, seeming to sense something was different. Instead of running to the back door, they sniffed. So many people had been there. So many scents to follow. I stood listening. I could faintly hear my parents outside unloading the car, but mostly I heard nothing. It was that same quiet the day I came home. Crumpled on the floor was Roger's sweatshirt. He must have been wearing it earlier that day. Strange that he took it off and left it on the floor. I picked it up and held it to my face. I could smell him. A mixture of zest in his deodorant, a smell unique to him. How could he be gone if his sweatshirt still smelled like him? He was just here, and this proved it. My heart raced. In the silence, I could hear my heart beating in my ears. I could feel the pound in my throat. The girls continued to sniff, moving from the kitchen to the bedroom and back again. Aside from the quiet, everything was the same. I walked into the kitchen. A last deep inhale filled my head with some semblance of Roger's presence, and I laid the sweatshirt on the table. There was an open bag of barely eaten baked Lays and a receipt. Walgreens, February 16th, 2011, 3:34 p.m., baked Lays and cheap, crappy wine. In my fog and shock, I hadn't noticed either on the table before. He had gone to Walgreens that afternoon, just as my school had ended, to buy chips and wine. My eyes moved to the island. The 2 wine bottles the officer had brought to my attention were still there. One drained entirely, the other maybe a quarter gone, cork and top. Looking back at the receipt, there was only 1 bottle accounted for. My heart continued to beat rapidly, my breath slow and deliberate. Picked up the corked bottle. I poured the contents into the sink, watching it as I allowed it to splash messily onto the counters. I put a finger into the stream and tasted it. It had soured, but nonetheless, you can tell it had been bad before. I could feel something welling up inside of me. It wasn't tears, and it wasn't sadness. Anger. Still exploring new scents, the girls sniffed their way to my feet, detecting the drops of wine that had made it to the floor. They licked at the droplets but were uninterested, perhaps agreeing with me in taste. Scarlett headed for the doggy door, ready to take her inspection outside. I debated whether or not I should let them out. Mostly, I debated whether I wanted to open the door yet. In a matter of seconds, I managed to run any gambit of possibilities, concerns, and fears through my head. But I knew this was the moment Mrs. Kubler-Ross had prepared me for. This is going to suck. I took the most cliché of deep breaths and walked to the door. I didn't even allow myself to look out the window yet. I turned the knob, documenting my hand's movement. As the door opened, I imagined this moment to be like the Wizard of Oz, opening the door to some new world, a world without my husband. I walked into the yard. The chair was gone. I sighed in relief. The girls followed me out, now very calculated in their movements and sniffs. Lucy lifted her nose to the air. I wondered what she detected. I stood on the back porch just looking for quite some time. Maybe I was building up courage. Maybe I simply wasn't sure what to do next. Another deep breath, and I moved into the grass. 4 days ago, I knelt over my husband, pumping his heart for him, breathing air into his chest. But 5 days ago, we were watching the Westminster Dog Show. It was all too bizarre. I found myself in that same spot. I squatted down in the grass, inspecting each blade, looking for some evidence of the nightmare I had just lived. Nothing. Just tiny green sprouts of color poking through the crisp brown leaves of winter. The dead blades poked me uncomfortably through the knees of my jeans. I hadn't felt that as I gave Roger CPR. I made a mental note to check my knees later. Rising back to my feet, I circled the yard like a labyrinth. Carefully searching every detail, I looked for anything that mentioned the horror I found there days before. And when my eyes couldn't find it, I closed them and felt. The wind chimes tinkled gently. The smallest hint of a breeze kissed my face. My heartbeat slowed to a normal speed. I was in my yard. That's all. No scene from a horror movie. Strangely, no stabbing reminder of heartache. No chair. Actually, no chairs at all. I'd have to find out where they all went. I'd been quietly building a good bit of fear about my yard the last few days. I was fairly positive what had once been a place of recreation, of grilling, of talking, of beveraging, as we teachers often call it, of watching stars and verbalizing dreams. I was sure that was all gone and replaced with 800 square feet of pain. And I'm sure I could have pulled that pain out of me. I'm sure I could have crawled into a mental space that linked my yard to loss and disassociated it from all else. I'm sure I could have guaranteed tears and anxiety every time I walked outside. But I didn't want that. I'd already lost my husband. I couldn't lose my home. Maybe with that thought guiding me, I looked out over the yard and saw the beds I built, the hours of amending soil, plants that had grown far larger than I expected the last 2 years. I saw the St. Augustine that I was coaxing to take over the space, crowding out the weeds we had purchased. And I saw Lucy squat and pee exactly where Roger had lain, and I gasped and then giggled at her naive irreverence. It was as though the universe gave me permission to chill the hell out. As lost as I felt, I needed someone to tell me that.